Hello everyone. This is going to be another quick one-take video. I had a number of questions in both direct messages and a few comments in the comment section of my last video on the ATEM Mini Extreme and Extreme ISO. I'm going to try and say it as ISO and not ISO, since someone in the comments pointed out that I should not spell out the ISO to make it clearer, but should say it as ISO for isolation. So I hope this makes you happy. For everyone else, we're going to quickly go over kind of the two options that are being discussed for how to bring in remote contributors to the ATEM Extreme. So with that, let's hop over and look at this. This is the device we're talking about. I'm sure you've all seen it repeatedly by now. And what we're talking about is probably a lot of people are going with option A here, which is remote contributors with a streaming bridge. That's kind of what everyone thinks to because it is a more broadcast appropriate option. It's obviously going to be higher quality and would require a fewer steps on the back end, like the video that we discussed before, the live stream that Aaron Parecki, Photo Joseph, and others did. That option assumes that either the person on the other end already has at least $2,935 worth of equipment with a proper camera, a proper lens, and a Mini Pro at the least to send to the streaming bridge, which is $245 of that total price on your end. So that's option one. Option two, the one that I'm seeing a lot of interest in, is this option on the right, which is how do I bring someone in via Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams, God forbid, Cisco, WebEx, you name it, whatever your video conferencing software is. And so today I want to go over what that option is, and I want to tell you straight up front, what I'm about to show you is not the greatest way to do this. It's fraught with potential for issues like ground loop hums and other things, so you really need to think through where you're going to be doing this, how you're going to be doing it, but it's probably the absolute cheapest way to start bringing remote guests in for your educational program, for your live streams, for your live to tape if you're going to start some sort of podcast, video podcast, whatever. And so with that, let's see. What we want to look at is your camera and audio source, how you're getting into the Extreme, how you're going to bring in up to 3 other contributors with you. So let's say one's on Zoom, one's on Google Meet, and one's on Microsoft Teams. To make that work, oh, sorry, wrong way. You're going to need a few other things. To return the feeds to all of them, I would recommend that you get 3 additional ATEM Minis. You probably already have 1 or 2, so maybe 1 or 2 more, and a number of HDMI splitters. I'll put a link to the one that I've been using to test in the description below. I'm going to say that one and not some of the others. If you go with some of the cheaper ones, like, what is it? I think there's one called Tech Pole or something like that. Those ones that are passive that do not have power going through them, they are inherently fraught with issues. So it's at your own peril if you want to go with something else. I'm just going to show you the one that's worked for both splitting the signal for Blackmagic Pocket 4K and for an ATEM Mini. So I've tested at least on 2 of the devices that are commonly going to be used in this workflow. Oh, and of course I've also tested it with a Mac Mini. So it does take the output of that as well. So first off, big thanks to John Barker here to record. If you don't follow him, do so. Get on his Discord. A number of us are testing out something called H2R Gear, which is how this is kind of set up. So as you can see, this is the workflow. Your camera, Blackmagic Pocket 4K in my case, is going to have your audio, your microphone going into it, and it will travel through a 4-split, and one leg will go to the first contributor's ATEM Mini, second ATEM Mini for the second contributor, and another to the third contributor, as well as to your new ATEM Mini Extreme or Extreme ISO. So what that does is it sends your video and, just as importantly, or more importantly, your audio to all 4 of those ATEM devices. And we're going to do something similar with each of the contributors as well, with the exception that they will only have 3 feeds going in. So from their 4-split, one will go into the Extreme or Extreme ISO One will go into the two other contributors, ATEM Minis, to return to those contributors. And what you're also going to do with the Extreme is, because there's a second audio bus for the headphones, you'll be able to do a custom mix minus just for you into something like a IFB or something like that, that does not have your audio coming into it. So you won't get that delay and get kind of mixed up with hearing yourself speak after the fact. So if you look at this in isolation, we're just going to take the last contributor, the fourth contributor. The way this would work is, because you're using those splitters, they would get all of the audio and video from the other contributors, yourself included. And what I would do is I would make sure that the audio is turned on for each of those contributors. For the Extreme, I would turn the audio off so that they don't get their audio back in, but I would send them that video with the other three contributors' audio. And in that way, you could do pretty much a mix minus, right? It's the same thing that would happen, or similarly to broadcast or radio or mini podcast, etc. What you're trying to do is get them some signal back so that they can kind of see what's going on, even if it's a second or two late. And if there's interest in this, let me know in the comments below and like the video, and I'll consider maybe doing some macros, or at least showing you guys how to do a combination of macros and using something like the Stream Deck and Companion software to actually facilitate something just a little bit higher than that. One thing that you want to think about is letting each of your contributors know when they're on air versus when they're not. And so building in a little time for, say, a red square to be over their video so that they can't see themselves waving a second to a second and a half behind would be really useful, because that's disconcerting. But the red square would let them know, just like a tally light on a camera in a professional space would let them know that they are live. And so you'd want to make that go about half a second before they actually rotate onto your live stream going out, whether that's in Zoom Webinar, YouTube, Facebook, or Facebook Workplace, I think is one that I saw in the comments. So let me know if you guys are interested in seeing how to set that up, and we can work on that once the Extremes finally make it to the States and we can all start playing with them. So here's what you're going to need. You're going to need 3 additional mini PCs. I would love to say Mac Minis, but if you're thinking about your upgrade path, the Mac Mini will not be able to use Dante for at least 2 more quarters of this year. It's probably going to be the 3rd or 4th quarter of 2021 before Dante is enabled on the M1 chip. So I am going to show you a small mini PC that I've been using for, gosh, since December or November of 2019, testing intermittently just for Zoom calls. And it allows up to 3 sources to come out. So one of those with a 8 gig upgrade in RAM, I think it's $225. So it's a pretty good deal. I wouldn't do anything more complex on it, but just to run one source and send their video back to them, or send the Extremes video back to them, I think it's perfectly fine for that. And at $225, you can wait until something like a better M1 or M2 or whatever the next thing is comes out that's more stable, and spend your money on that. So then you're going to need 5 HDMI splitters like we showed you before, and finally you'll need those 3 ATEM Minis. Just the plain Mini is perfectly alright for that, plus the Extreme that you've probably already bought if you're like the rest of us, and your own camera and microphone. So with that, I do want to address this one question that was in the chat or in the comments of the prior video. Neville Henderson, thank you for this question. It's a really good one. What I just described for you is going to be a little bit difficult in the scenario that you're speaking of. If you're all on the same panel in Zoom Webinar, what you're going to run into is you won't be able to pin each person individually. So if you're trying to maximize them onto a 1080, 1920 by 1080 monitor so that you get the best resolution possible, and then bring them in through the SuperSource like that, you would end up, if you had 3 people with you, at least one person would have to come in on a separate device. So it would be those separate devices, kind of like what was shown. But if you have 3 devices bringing in the audio and you're all in the same room or the same webinar instance on a panel, for instance, and everyone's audio is coming in separately, and everyone's videos coming in separately, whether it's Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, any of those currently in any option other than VizRT for bringing in NDI even. It will bring in individual video sources, but it's still a sum of all the audio. So what you would want to do is actually not bring them in through the webinar. You would want to bring them into, say, one Zoom meeting and have them each in a different breakout room and send those returns with those ATEM Minis to those individual breakout rooms so that they could see what was going on. It's kind of like their own personal green room, one per person, or their own main stage or A, B, and C stage, however you want to phrase that. But what you're going to achieve by doing that is you won't have the chance that even though all of those computers or all of those sources are on the same network, your network, traversing the same path, at some point, if you ever stick an ear monitor in each ear and you bring up Zoom on two different computers, at some point, they're going to fall out of sync. And that's really disconcerting for attendees in a meeting. So just think through getting them into isolated rooms or isolated breakouts, or use different, Skype, whatever. Maybe not Skype, but whichever you choose or whichever your company will allow in your case. And I think that's probably the best way to handle that. And so with that, let's turn back over to here. I hope that's kind of helpful. If you have additional questions, really all this is about is the cheapest way to get everyone a return feed to see what's more or less going on, perhaps a second or two behind, and to allow them to hear each other without hearing themselves again. If you add the cumulative delay from their signal coming to you and then going back to them, that can be half a second to a second, maybe more if they're overseas. So just try to avoid that at all costs. Again, this setup is not the one that I would most highly recommend. I'll go over that once equipment arrives. It will at least get you started. If you're a church or an educator or someone who's on a super tight budget, I think this gets you pretty close, or at least gets you started until you can prove out whether or not it's worth continuing to invest in upgrades to your equipment. So I hope that helps. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you have additional questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll try to sort through them and see what I can show you guys without having the equipment on hand yet. And I'll definitely provide some more videos once the equipment finally arrives. All right, thanks. Have a great week.